The Åland Islands is an archipelago of 6,700 islands in the Baltic Sea between Finland and Sweden. It is a part of Finland, but it is an autonomous region of Finland. The structure of Åland's autonomy is referred to as the Åland example, and in 1992, the Åland Peace Institute was founded with a focus on peace and conflict issues using the Åland example as a starting point. I got the opportunity to interview the outgoing director of 17 years, Spiliopoulou Åkermark, and we discussed the Åland example, what it means, and what it means in today's world.
Yes.
So I thought I guess you could just explain why Åland is an autonomous region of Finland. Why would it even be necessary?
So Åland is globally special because it is both an autonomous region, an autonomous part of the Republic of Finland, as well as being demilitarized and neutralized. And it has been so for more than 100 years.
Okay. So what is demilitarized versus neutralized?
Yes, these are terms that are used in international affairs and international law to describe the special security position of a limited territory. And demilitarization means that it is not permitted to have any military installations or troops on this territory. On the other hand, neutralization is a different term that has to do with what happens in the event that there is a military confrontation in the region and involving the countries around. And in such a situation, the neutralization rules make it so that none of the parties involved in a conflict are allowed to pull in and have military activities on the Åland Islands.
So this was a deal that was created during the League of Nations, correct?
Yes, in the early 20s, so quite a lot happens at that time in our part of the world too. Finland became a republic, became a new state after its declaration of independence in December 1917. And in this complex situation that arises, as you know, of course, the Russian revolutions are taking place in 1918, 17, 18. We have the end of the First World War, so the whole peace process and the creation of the League of Nations. And within this fluidity, there was also a question about what should happen with the special region of the Åland Islands. It's an archipelago with, as you know, so many small and larger islands in the middle of the Baltic Sea. And both Sweden and Finland had ambitions of including the territory in their respective states, while at the same time the Ålanders wanted to secure that they can continue speaking Swedish and belong to the Swedish-speaking identity sphere.
Okay. So this was done under the League of Nations, but the League of Nations doesn't exist anymore. So does that have some kind of...
Yeah, I think that's a very good question because most of us, it's quite human and natural. We are very engaged and troubled by what is happening now. So we have quite a short time span very often in our thinking and in our everyday life. But from a legal and from a diplomatic point of view, the the spectrum is much, much larger. And it's very common that we have in international affairs and law agreements that go back 100 or 200 years, and even longer. As I understand, there are treaties that is agreements pertaining to the delimitation in the seas that date back to the 15th century. So that's not unusual as such, and I think that it's quite interesting that in fact the beginning of the international position of the Åland Islands is found in the middle of the 19th century and the end of the Crimean War, because that is when the first demilitarization agreement concerning the Åland Islands was agreed upon and is still valid.
Okay. So the Åland Islands must clearly be critical, militarily speaking, or they were when these agreements were made. Are they still like so?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting question, because if we look, and there is some debate among researchers on how we should view this. On the one hand, generally speaking, and especially for Finland, the entry to the Bothnian Bay, the Gulf, is important because it's the whole of the northern part of the country. And of course, Finland has a need to secure that there are maritime ways of transporting and seeing that the country has fuel or food or whatever that may be needed in any situation. On the other hand, we saw both in the middle of the 19th century, at the end of the Crimean War, as well as in the League of Nations startup concerning the settlements, that the Åland Islands was actually a very minor question.
Okay.
So depending on whose perspective you want to see it from, it is more or less important.
Okay.
In any case, I think it is clear that for the Ålanders, it's very important, because people who live here, they want to have peace and they want to be able to retain their special regional identity.
Right. Now, there's one of the co-signers of these agreements is Russia, of course, and they have a consulate here on the Åland Islands. Can you speak to why they have a consulate here?
Yes, I think that the position of Russia is very important, both as a major power in the region, and of course the fact that Russia has illegally attacked Ukraine has created a lot of worry and meant tremendous changes in the whole region. But it is important, I think, to remember that Russia signed the first agreement in 1856 to the great surprise of Great Britain. Great Britain proposed, according to researchers, proposed the demilitarization of the Åland Islands, thinking that the Russian Empire of that time would reject the proposal and there would be an escalation of conflict. But it turned out that the Russian Empire had much higher priorities in the Black Sea and managing the disintegration of the Ottoman Empire, so the wider picture, and agreed that this was a good solution.
Okay.
On the other hand, the convention that was signed in 1921 within the framework of the League of Nations concerning the demilitarization and neutralization was not signed by Russia. Russia was not even invited in the negotiations because the country was transferring from the Russian empire to what later on became the USSR. So many states, most states at that time, had not recognized the new constellation, and the Soviet Union did not become a member of the League of Nations until the late 30s, when Germany left.
Okay.
This we can say that Russia is bound by the 1856 treaty. It is also bound by the fact that all countries that have moved and acted around in the Baltic Sea have, across these 150 plus years, respected. And this, for international lawyers, this creates the position of a customary law, that is an agreement or a rule that states respect by acquiescence, accepting that this is the situation.
Okay.
But for the relations, the bilateral relations between Finland and the USSR, the Soviet Union, this position of Russia expanded through a bilateral agreement in 1940.
Okay.
Whereby the demilitarized status was confirmed. The question about neutralization was left uncommented, so it was not included.
Mm-hmm.
But what differs between the 1921 agreement and the 1940 agreement is that Russia has been given the right to have a consulate.
Okay.
And of course, we should remember that there is also a consulate for Sweden that has been here since 1918 already. And we know that there are several countries that have consulates on the Åland Islands. In the other cases, it's honorary consulates rather than a special diplomatic office.
So I would say the one thing with the Russian consulate is I never see any activity there. So are there really people in the consulate?
As far as we know, there is only one consul at the moment, so one person and his wife.
Okay.
This is in contrast to what was the situation during the Cold War, where there were many officials here.
Okay.
Of course, it is also important to recall that there is a Russian embassy in Helsinki.
Right.
And that Finland and Russia have not interrupted completely their diplomatic relations. This is something, even though they are at the minimum level, let's say today, because of the criticism of the illegal aggression against Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so we can say that it's a position of international law that a war between other countries should not affect or destroy the diplomatic relations of other states which are not themselves parties to the conflict. And Finland is not a party to the conflict, even though as part of the European Union and as part of most of those countries that have been very upset and reacted against the aggression against Ukraine, the idea is that we maintain relations in international law and affairs in order to be able to address the problems that an illegal war always creates.
Okay. Now, because of this war, Finland got nervous, and so they joined NATO.
Mm-hmm.
How does Finland joining NATO affect this demilitarized and neutralized agreement?
Well, at one level, it doesn't affect it at all, in the sense that formally, during the accession period, from early on, it was made clear from the side of Finland that the accession to NATO doesn't change the position of the Åland Islands as an autonomous, demilitarized and neutralized region. Mm-hmm. To me, in one sense, that also indicates that Finland is able to defend its territory, including Åland, in a situation of conflict. Because we should always remember that the right to self-defense is not destroyed or annihilated because of the demilitarization. If Finland is attacked, it has the right to defend itself. But in the case of the Åland region, this defense has to be done under certain circumstances.
Okay.
Yes. So on the other hand, I think that most of those who very warmly have supported the accession to NATO, they would say that it is an additional guarantee for Finland, because according to the 1921 Convention, for instance, Finland has the right to request the support of other signatory countries or other actors in international affairs to defend itself, including the Åland Islands. And now that so many of the countries that also have signed the conventions are members of NATO, then there is a larger pool.
Okay.
Yes. But from the side of the Russian Federation, there has also been a confirmation that they regard the position of the Åland Islands as a demilitarized region.
So now, talking about the Peace Institute, can you speak to just the role of the Peace Institute and what its role is here on Åland and internationally?
Yes. Well, I have worked at the Peace Institute for 17 years, and now I'm moving more into research. And I do this having been even more convinced than I was when I started my work at the Peace Institute, that there is a great need for both more knowledge and more action, or cooperation rather, in matters pertaining to disputes concerning border regions, and especially regions with a very strong local identity, as the Åland Islands are. And the Peace Institute is a very small, very specialized think tank, perhaps in proportion to the smallness of the Åland Islands. And the Åland Islands Peace Institute focuses on issues of minorities and their position within countries and between countries, on issues of nonviolent resolution of conflicts, and last but not least, of how actually territorial autonomy works. I think that perhaps from a US perspective, the starting point is often federalism, that is, to have equally strong states with a comparable position vis-à-vis the center. But the position of a territorial autonomy like the Åland Islands is quite different, in having this very specialized, differentiated solution for a very small part of the country, in a country which is otherwise centralized, let's say. Mm-hmm. And we see that there is a great interest. There are so many visits, there are so many requests for information and knowledge, for cooperation, and this is both within Europe, because there are several such regions. None is both demilitarized and neutralized as well as autonomous, but there are various combinations of such security and governance, let's call it, complex solutions.
Mm-hmm. Can you give an example of another autonomous region that maybe the Peace Institute has worked with? Or?
Well, I think there are both, let's say, those that are part of democratic countries in relative prosperity and calm, whether you want to speak about the Basque country as part of Spain, or the Azores as part of Portugal. So islands are very often in such a position. In the Nordic context, we have the Faroe Islands and Greenland as autonomous regions in Denmark, in the Kingdom of Denmark. And in Norway, we have the Svalbard Islands, or Spitsbergen, as it is also called, which is a demilitarized but very different solution. So these are close by or in a European region, but of course you have also troublesome parts of the world where you may have an occupation or an active dispute. And I'm thinking of northern Cyprus, of Kashmir, where we have had, let's say, a backlash in the autonomous position, or in Bougainville in the Pacific. Just to take, there are very many. According to some researchers, there are more than 60 asymmetric autonomies in the world today.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have a wide definition, let's say not so strict about what territorial autonomy means, then you end up with almost 140 or 150 such cases.
Okay.
So depending on what you want to focus on, either in a practical peace effort or in a research study, then you will have different comparatives and cases to look at.
Okay. So the Peace Institute, you have people come here and study the Åland example, is that correct?
Yes, so the Peace Institute, on the one hand, develops knowledge and responds to questions and tries to understand. It's a little bit of let's say, an analysis of what's going on all the time around the world. And we do receive also researchers and journalists, political figures, NGO representatives, students, and so on, that want to discuss and learn more about similar solutions. But I think it's really important to think of this contingency of solutions, that, you know, it's really not possible to take really the same thing as the Åland Islands and to put it somewhere else, but there are some elements that may be useful around the world.
Okay. I think that's kind of my questions. Is there something you feel like I should have asked, or something you'd like to comment on?
No, I think perhaps as I was thinking, there is no explicit question among your questions, but somehow the Nordic and European integration is a little bit relevant, that Åland doesn't see itself as, you know, only simply a part of Finland, but you say the Central Baltic, for example.
Right.
You know, this effort to really be integrated in various spheres, I find this very interesting. Yeah,
they for certain funding, they will be considered kind of their own country, and they part of the Nordic
Nordic Council,
Right.
the Nordic Council of Ministers.
Yeah, they have their own position there.
So it's not only an economic pool. Of course, this is one of the dimensions, but it is also it's the political integration, which makes a broader network of connections than simply being referred to the axis between Helsinki and Mariehamn, the capitals of the central state and the region.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's a question about knowledge. Yes, to try. I think this is one of the major problems of such a small region like the Åland Islands. How can you manage in a high globalized, high knowledge, dense world? How can you manage such a small society?
Right.
And I think all these, perhaps already from the early 20th century, the whole process has been one of being, on the one hand, maintaining your regional identity and at the same time being connected to the world all the time.
Right.
It's kind of connectedness, but with some dignity of identity.
Yeah. Åland does have that kind of special position where it clearly is advantageous to be part of Finland. It's what it's close to, and Finland is bigger. But then it does feel kind of a connection to Sweden in a way, culturally.
Yeah, many connections.
Yeah,
and others would say, oh, but we're very connected to the southern border of Denmark and Germany with the Schleswig-Holstein and the South Danish issue, where you also had a very special solution. So different people would emphasize different connections depending on what they want to highlight.
right.
Yes, and then you also had this question about what can people do. So apart from visiting,
Right.
people are always welcome to visit. I think it's usually more agreeable in the summer, but that's a matter of taste, I think.
Yes, definitely this summer with the tall ship race.
Yes, definitely. And the Peace Institute has the first balcony over the harbor, so it's the most central place to be. and there's a lot of information on the website of the Peace Institute.
Okay.
Also on the questions that you asked about, and reports that are open access available. And then there is an e-course that is offered regularly, and we have just finished one. So it's a digital course with a possibility to enroll from around the world. And it is very dynamic and I think extremely interesting discussions among people from the US to the Pacific on the other side, all the way around. And then there is a journal which is called the Journal on Autonomy and Security Studies, JAS, that you can find the link through the Peace Institute. And last but not least, at the end of March every year, we host the Kastelholm Talks on Peace, which you can come and attend in person, but it is also possible to see part of the main part of the discussion is now in English. It was not so in the beginning. This year it's the 10th anniversary. And many of them, the previous ones, can then be followed with subtitles if they were in Swedish, so that people can follow. And I think that this is also a part of this effort to connect, not to be isolated as a bubble in the middle of the Baltic Sea, but reflectively consider one's position in the world.
Okay. Now, you are leaving. You're heading off for research in Åbo. correct?
Yes, I have become professor of law at Åkermark University. I'm still completing a study that I'm doing here for the Åland Islands Peace Institute, but there is a new director, Susanne Simolin.
Okay.
As of today, Jessica.
As of today.
Yes.
Very nice.
Yes. I feel very grateful that I have been able to work here for so many years and have enjoyed so much working here. There are two main reasons why I'm leaving, because of course peace work is needed more than ever. One is to have the best access to library resources for some of the research that I haven't been able to complete while here. And secondly, to meet all the young students who are so committed, and of course I have seen them here as trainees or visitors, participants in seminars, but I think that this engaging with other generations is extremely interested, and I'm very inspired by that.
Oh, that's nice. Very nice. Well, thank you for your time.
Yes.
And
thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, and this should be very interesting for people.
Yeah,
I think they'll really enjoy this. I mean, it's just so different.
It is, but I mean, if you want in your intro or something, I think the most comparable, usually among researchers, the most comparable region in the US is Puerto Rico.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Because Puerto Rico has this, it's a different background because it is the colonial past, but it has this differentiated position. It's not one of the 52 states, but it is autonomous in many ways.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect.